What is going on, traders? Happy Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for tuning back into the channel today. I really do appreciate your time and hope you guys were all able to end on a green note. But as usual, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a recap and let you guys know exactly how my day trading did go today. So let's get right into today's video. And as you guys can see from your screens, unfortunately today was a red day for me, right? I was down about $114 in terms of my day trading, and that consisted of an $81 loss on TQQQ, about a $33 loss on SQQQ, and then, you guys do know I have my 9 open shares on Tesla, which did lose me an additional $108 today, right? But these were all my filled orders for the day. As you guys can see, I started trading at 6:30, stopped trading at 9:11, right? So I was trading longer than I was yesterday. And so yeah, I want to go ahead and let you guys know exactly what my thought process was as I was trading and some mistakes I made that maybe you guys can learn from, right? And that I'll definitely try to work on and improve heading into tomorrow and Friday. But pretty much what I saw going on was the Nasdaq was clearly selling off all pre-market, right? This thing was continuously making these lower highs, lower lows, right? Every time it broke above the EMA, it really struggled to hold and would just break below it again, continuously sell off. Ultimately, it did find a support right around bottom VWAP, ended up bouncing, right? It was able to ride all the way up to the middle VWAP, got rejected, and then continuously started to sell off again, right? And so heading into market open, you guys will see it's when it's right at 6:30 where you see these increase in volume bars. But what I saw going on was there was a very strong support level it was establishing right during pre-market, right before market open, right? As you guys can see, anytime it tried, breaking below this support level, it really struggled to, right? It would tend to bounce, try to break below it again, bounce. And so heading into market open, we saw the momentum start to shoot this thing up, right? And given the fact that the way stocks typically tend to move is they'll get rejected, they'll start to trade sideways, or also known as consolidation, right? And then it'll have a bit of a reversal. And so, given the fact that this thing sold off, right, was establishing a strong support, and then at market open, we did see the increase in momentum, which started to push this thing up. I decided to take a position on TQQQ, right? As you guys will notice, right? One of my first positions was on TQQQ, and I bought in with about a 25% position size. And so as this started to push up, I decided to cut it around this area because I thought there was a good chance that it could get rejected right around middle VWAP and ultimately start to sell off again, right? How did I know that? Well, anytime it approached middle VWAP during pre-market, this thing would continuously sell off aggressively, right? And so as this thing pushed up and started to sell off, I waited for this thing to bleed. And right around this area, I decided to take another trade on TQQQ, right? And ultimately, my reasoning behind that was, well, this thing had a nice push, right? I thought we were going to pull back a bit and then continue to uptrend almost in that, fashion. But that's not what ended up happening, right? This thing sold off, right? I had to stop out. And then as this thing, approached previous support levels, it ended up trying to bounce. I thought that, this was the bottom. I really tried predicting the bottom today. Got into TQQQ. This thing ultimately continuously get rejected, right? And then I would continuously just stop out, have these small losses, which ultimately started to pile up, right? Because as these things would bounce, I would buy, maybe average up again with another 25%. Then as this thing started to sell off, I'd have to reduce shares, right? And so I kept on dealing with this problem with where I kept thinking that, oh, it had to be a TQQQ today, right? This thing has to start to push up just because I think it will. And that's a huge mistake that lots of traders make, right? I made the same mistake today, and it's falling in love with your trade. I really thought today we were going to see a really nice TQQQ day, given the fact that, market was selling off, but that does ultimately mean that there was room to recover, right? And so what ended up happening was, as I mentioned, I kept getting stopped out on this choppiness, right? And as this thing finally broke above the EMA, I bought into TQQQ, averaged up, only for this thing to get rejected again, right? And so I was just digging myself in a big hole and not allowing myself to wait for the opportunity to present itself, right? And so what I should have waited for was, I don't think it was the dumbest idea to buy into TQQQ right around these areas, but I think what was really dumb of me was I wasn't waiting for signs of confirmation to average up, right? I just was averaging up before this thing even broke above the EMA, right? And even over here, when I did average up, I did a poor job of reducing the shares as this thing started to fall, right? So I definitely need to do a better job of of managing my risk and reducing shares at areas where it starts to form a resistance, right? And so as this thing broke below, right, I was already down a decent amount, and I was already, thinking to myself like, okay, direction is very choppy. At this point, I don't even know if it's gonna be a TQ day anymore, right? Because we did have a nice push, but then we just made this lower high. And what ended up happening? Well, it broke above the EMA again, right? And then as this thing pulled on back, there was a good sign that it broke the previous resistance, but then it did start to pull on back to EMA. And right here would have been a beautiful play to take advantage of. So I actually was able to make back a lot of my loss on the day, just that I got, trading this choppiness just by this one trade here, right? And so what makes this such a nice setup is the fact that um, the EMA was no longer acting as a resistance, or as a resistance, but rather a support, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, all pre-market, right? Every time it would try to approach the EMA, or it's this blue glowing line, it would get rejected, right? It would end up trying to bounce, touch the EMA, get rejected, touch the EMA, get rejected, touch the EMA. Well, this one it broke above, but as it broke below, right? Anytime it'd get close to the EMA, it would just continuously sell off. And so finally, this thing broke above, right? It broke above its previous resistance area, pulled on back, and right here is super important, guys. Right here, it no longer started to, use the EMA as a resistance, but rather as a support, right? It broke below it for a brief second and then started to climb. So right around this area, I decided to add more to my position, right? And so I ultimately started, to ride this thing up. But unfortunately, because of the fact that I took such big losses here, right, I was still red even after riding this thing up. And so as this thing was continuing to climb, right, this thing ended up breaking below the EMA again, as you guys will notice, right? It broke below the EMA, and right around this area, I tried another TQQQ play, right? Because that's where, the what I was mentioning about falling in love with your trade really comes to bite you in the butt. And it's the fact that I thought, oh, we're looking super strong now, right? We're gonna pull on back and then continue to, form higher highs and higher lows, and that's not what ended up happening, right? This thing would break below the EMA. I'd buy back into TQQQ only for this thing to get rejected, right? I'd try another TQQQ play. This thing would get rejected, form these lower lows, and I just kept stopping out, right? I took lots of red trades on the day, and I continuously, um, I continue to trade even though I knew that I wasn't performing the best with the market today, right? Yesterday was a different story. Most of my trades were green. I felt good throughout the whole day. Most of my trades were in the green, but the fact that today, heading into today, I fell in love with the trade, thinking it was going to be a big TQQQ day, and I was really ignoring the fact of changes in direction, right? So just because this thing pushed up, that doesn't mean that it had to continue to climb forever. And if we actually take a step back and look at the NASDAQ on the 5-day, 5-minute, right, what I should have paid attention to was the bigger picture. What do I mean by that? Well, the NASDAQ climbed up a decent amount the past 2 days. And then ultimately pre-market, it was starting to indicate signs of a sell-off. So ultimately, right, it would form these lower highs and lower lows. So big picture, yeah, it did have times where it was uptrending, but direction would change pretty quickly, right? It'd get rejected at the middle VWAP. And ultimately, that's what we ended up seeing again today, right? So what I should have taken note of was the potential lower highs, right, that could have formed on the day, right? This just because it bounced here and it's bounced here before, it doesn't mean it has to bounce to where it previously got rejected at, right? This thing had a chance of forming lower lows and lower highs, especially because the Nasdaq is a bit more overbought at these levels, right? Because we have been pushing up nicely the past few days. So given the fact that this thing pushed up and was no longer making higher highs, right? It was trading sideways now and then forming these lower highs. So as this thing pushed up, I should have been aware that it never crossed the resistance that it had before. And so ultimately, what that meant to me was, that this thing could end up pulling on back and changing direction and selling off on the day. So that's where I really went wrong today. I continue to try to buy into TQQQ and try to predict the bottom, but it completely blinded me to the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture today was direction was changing quick. Yeah, it changed here, but it ended up changing direction again. And rather than try to, go with the flow and get into SQQQ and try to follow direction on the day, I continuously tried to find the bottom of TQQQ and it never ended up happening, right? So that's the big mistake I made today that I want all of you to be able to learn from. It's the fact that you really just need to put your ego aside and realize that when direction is changing, right? It's best to try not to predict the bottom of, when something's gonna end up reversing, right? As you guys can see here, I tried predicting the bottom here, I got burned, had to stop out. Tried predicting the bottom here as it would bounce and had to stop out. I was doing this all day, right? Rather than realizing the bigger picture of this thing is now forming lower lows, lower highs. Anytime it breaks above the EMA, it doesn't hold for very long, right? It continuously gets rejected and made even lower high than it did before. Lower high and lower low. And then as this thing started to climb, what ended up happening? It got rejected yet again and formed an even lower high here, right? But I was so oblivious to this because of the fact that I was just so one-sided today, focusing on, oh, I need to get TQQQ right at the bounce, but there was no bounce today, right? And I completely ignored the clear direction it started having towards, market close, right? This thing continuously started to sell off. Anytime it broke above the EMA, it would really struggle to hold, and it just was a bloodbath today. Continuously sold off, and I called it right around this area, right? As this thing broke below this previous support for a second, I stopped out, and it did bounce again, but ultimately it did end up saving me money as this thing continuously sold off, right? And so that's a big lesson I wanted you guys to learn from today. It's to never really fall in love with a trade, right? And always take a step back, put your ego aside, and realize, what is the market telling me? Which way is the market headed, right? Right? If this thing is continuously struggling to break above and hold above middle VWAP, is it really in my best interest to try to predict the bottom all day? No, right? And so, that's a big mistake I made that I'm really going to try to fix heading into tomorrow and Friday. I'm going to really try to stay open-minded in terms of, which way direction could be headed, and really just try to trade with the price action, right? But that's ultimately everything I did want to talk about in terms of my day trading today. I did want to mention too, right, Tesla, because I did mention it did lose me money earlier. What ended up happening today exactly? Well, Tesla had earnings, right? I did mention it in yesterday's video. I don't know if any of you guys saw that, but I did mention that this week there are lots of earnings coming out, right? We saw Netflix have earnings yesterday, right? That's why it had a huge push up, right? But ultimately with earnings, right, it's really 50-50. You don't know what they're going to report. So by staying in a trade through earnings, it's kind of taking a gamble, right? But given the only reason I decided to hold my shares of Tesla was I'm not in with a very big dollar amount in terms of what I plan to be with in the future, right? Tesla itself has been very bearish, but the moment it starts to change direction and get bullish, I'm really going to try to, buy more shares as directions in my favor. But it makes no sense to be buying shares when this is how Tesla's been looking, right? Continuously selling off, continuously selling off. Why would I be adding to something that is just continuously losing me money? It makes no sense, right? You want to add more money to something that's making you money. It's just completely counterintuitive to be adding to something that's losing you money in hopes you find the bottom, right? That's really not the way I want to trade, and I don't think it's a very effective way to trade at all. But Tesla, as we saw, right? It was really trading sideways all day, right? Typically, that's what happens when a stock has earnings reports. It's, not the most significant day, but what we ended up seeing was this thing shot up, right? 3% up to 228 and completely got rejected. So it went from 228 all the way down to 206. So for any of you who see that, that's like a 10% drop within like a minute. So that was insane to witness, right? And then it ultimately did find a support. It did have these nice little green bars every now and then, but ultimately, it did continue to sell off on the day. And so we are at around $208 a share. And at market close, it was at $222, right? So pretty big difference in price. And that is what led to me being down $108 on Tesla itself today. But yeah, I just want to make you guys aware, if you guys are invested in anything, right, long term, make sure you pull up on Google. You could literally just Google, earnings report, and it'll tell you a list of the stocks that have earnings report that day. And so today was Tesla. Unfortunately, it didn't go as planned, right? It ended up tanking. But bigger picture, what am I gonna wait for before I add into Tesla? Well, the Nasdaq has been super bearish, right? So and as you guys know, Tesla correlates pretty almost perfectly with the Nasdaq in the sense that whenever the Nasdaq has a red day, Tesla tends to have a red day. Whenever the Nasdaq has a green day, Tesla tends to have a green day, right? And so as the Nasdaq's been selling off very aggressively, right? It makes no sense, as I mentioned, to be adding to Tesla, because as this thing's dropping, it's dropping Tesla with it. But ultimately, what do I want to wait to see happen? I want to wait for this thing to break above the EMA, right? Pull on back, then start to use the EMA as a support, like it did here, right? Look at this. Look at this really beautiful uptrend where it breaks above the EMA, and every single time it tries to test the EMA, it bounces and forms higher highs and higher lows. Right now we're doing the exact opposite. We're getting rejected every time we touch the EMA, right? So it's definitely going to be a while until I feel really comfortable adding shares to Tesla, right? If I do add shares to Tesla, it may just be for a day trade if I feel the Nasdaq's pretty oversold and, could bounce on the day. But yeah, the Nasdaq itself's not looking too pretty, right? It's been continuously making these lower highs, lower lows, and we did break below that 180-day EMA now. So that's definitely not the best sign for us. That does mean we can start to sell off. We can even make a lower high, right? We can break below this support and just, continue to fall. There is no indication that this thing is reversing just yet, so we do want to, keep an eye out on that. But, that doesn't mean that you guys should completely avoid investing at all. Lots of companies like Apple, right? Apple's down here now, Microsoft, all of these huge tech companies are now at a really good price in terms of where they were a year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? So if you guys do have extra money lying around, I really don't think it's the dumbest idea to be buying into some of these big companies, right? Because ultimately, as we know, the market tends to recover over time. And right now, when there tends to be the most fear is when it's really tends to have the best prices, right? As you guys can tell, lots of fear in the market going on. As I just showed you, Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, lots of these big tech companies are at really good deals, right? And ultimately, they may end up recovering. The hard part about it is knowing exactly when it will recover or how long it will take to recover, right? Because, it can be months, year, or even a year, 2 years before the market recovers. We really have no idea of knowing when, right? But until we start to get signs of an uptrend, then that's really when I'm going to start to step on the gas with Tesla. But that's everything I wanted to talk about today. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the channel. If you guys are new to the channel, we really do appreciate you dropping a like and subscribing. And if you guys have any questions at all whatsoever, you want me to break down a stock or an indicator for you, go ahead and drop a comment, and I am more than happy to make a video on it. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about today. I will be posting a recap tomorrow. So I hope to see you guys then. Take care and have a good rest of your day.